Hey everyone! If you want to see how to make a pallet garden, keep watching for some step-by-step instructions. A pallet garden is a great use of vertical space. We have had success growing lettuce in pallets and are able to harvest leaves from each plant about 5 times each summer. Because the pallet is not in direct sun, it offers the lettuce some shade, allowing it to grow into the hotter summer months before bolting. In terms of varieties, you can grow Nevada lettuce, Boston, oak leaf, and other loose leaf varieties. Because the top of the pallet is open and exposed to more sunlight, you can add veggies and herbs that thrive in more sun. We've grown kale in the past, and this year planted parsley, basil, and cilantro. One year we planted it with trailing flowers, which is a nice way to add some color. To make a pallet garden, first you will need to source a pallet. There are a few different pallet types and shapes, and I've left a link below with more information on these pallets and how to read their stamps. We are using pallets that are heat treated, but you'll want to do a bit of research on your own just to make sure the pallet you are using is safe for home. We found our pallet outside of a restaurant, but you can also try grocery stores and garden centers. Any store really that receives large shipments of materials is likely to have one. Please ask before you take it. In our experience, people are fine to let them go for free, but it's best to make sure. The other items you'll need to make a pallet garden are easily sourced from a garden center or hardware store. You will need landscaping fabric, a staple gun, staples, scissors, and a utility knife. A full-size pallet will require about 160 liters of soil, which is quite a bit, but after this initial investment, you can use the majority of soil over again. Each year we just mix the soil with manure to replenish it with nutrients. Once full, the pallet is really heavy, so bungee cords or rope that can be used to tie the pallet to a nearby fence is a good idea. The first 2 years that we planted lettuce, we didn't have any irrigation in place. We simply used our garden hose to water from the top and through the front of the landscaping fabric. But to save a bit of time, last year we drilled holes into plastic tubing and put this tubing into the pallet to take water to the plants near the bottom. You could also purchase irrigation kits that hook into your hose. Once you have all of your materials gathered, lay your pallet down on the ground, front side down. You want to work on your pallet in the space directly in front of where the pallet will stand. Once it's full of soil, it will be really heavy, so it's easier if you're able to just lift it up and lean it back. When cutting the fabric, you'll want to make sure there's excess fabric on all sides. This will ensure there's enough material to wrap around the sides of the pallet so you can staple it. When I'm measuring the length of the pallet, I'm wrapping the material around the top and bottom sides of the pallet too, essentially including the depth of the pallet in my measurement. I'm going to cut 2 lengths of fabric, one for the front and one for the back. I'm going to first line the front inside of this pallet. This is the material that we'll cut into to place our lettuce roots. I'm pulling some of the fabric out of the bottom end, and I'm going to staple this to the back side of the pallet, creating a little pocket so the soil doesn't spill out the bottom. I'm then going to work my way up the pallet, stapling fabric to the top and bottom of each horizontal wooden plank, as well as along the sides. When stapling your fabric, it's important to make sure it's taut. Removing as much slack as possible is important because once you stand your pallet up, gravity is going to pull all the soil down. And if there's any slack in the fabric, the soil is going to fill up these spaces. So you want to minimize this as much as possible. Once the fabric is stapled to the front of the pallet, it's time to add your soil. I'm using a mixture of high-quality potting soil and mixing it with sheep's manure. For this half-size pallet, I'm using half a bag of manure, and the rest of this 80-liter bin is filled with high-quality potting soil. If you are using an irrigation method, you would add it at this stage. I actually completely forgot to do this, so I'm going to show you how you can add a plastic tube once the pallet is standing up. Push the soil into the bottom of the pallet and under all of the horizontal planks. It's easiest to add soil before you seal up the back of the pallet. Remember that the soil will fall once you stand the pallet up, and although some sinking is inevitable, ensuring the pallet is as full as possible at this stage will save you from having to fill up the pallet with more soil from the top. Once my pallet is full, I'm using a broom to sweep any excess soil from the back of my pallet. I want to make sure the horizontal planks and the sides of the pallet are as clean as possible, because the next step is to staple fabric to the back and seal it up with the second length of fabric that I cut. Ideally, I would have more fabric to wrap around the sides of the pallet. This would not only make it easier for me to staple, but would also minimize any gaps that soil could spill out of. The biggest takeaway, though, from this part of the video is to lay the fabric down and staple it following the shape of the pallet. Stapling the fabric to all the nooks and edges will keep the fabric as taut as possible. I recommend stapling it to as many surfaces as you can, making sure to staple it to the top and bottom edges as well as the face of each horizontal plank. Once the landscaping fabric is stapled and the soil is sealed, it's time to stand the pallet up. Ours leans against our fence at a bit of an angle, and because the pallet is really heavy, we secure it with bungee cords. As you may have noticed, gravity pulled the soil into the slackened areas of the landscaping fabric, so I filled the pallet to the top with more soil. Last year, when I decided to add irrigation, the pallets were already set up, so I found a way to add my plastic hose from the top. I used a wooden dowel that was slightly smaller in diameter than the plastic tubing, and then pushed both of the dowel and the hose through the soil and into the pallet. Once the tube reached the bottom, I pulled the dowel out, leaving the hose in place. The dowel slides in relatively easily, but if you come up against a little resistance, just wiggle it around to move it through the soil. Be careful not to push too hard though, or you may puncture a hole in the landscaping fabric. The hose runs in between two columns of lettuce. There are 2 tubes in the big pallet and 1 in the half-size pallet. It is best to leave the pallet upright for a couple of days so that the soil settles. If you plant right away, it's likely that your plants will sink into the planter and you'll have to dig them out. This has happened to me before, but if you have the time, it will save you a bit of trouble. To encourage your soil to sink, you can water it from the top. Before you start planting, fill the pallet back up from the top with as much soil as you need. Now that the pallets are filled with as much soil as possible, we are ready to plant. I'm using an X-Acto knife to cut small slits in the fabric so that we can wedge our lettuce plants in. I recommend cutting these openings as small as possible. If the holes are too big, soil will spill out as you water. This is inevitable, and the risk of this happening will decrease as the roots establish themselves, but best to minimize this if you can. If you find that the cuts you've made are too small, it will be easy enough to make them bigger if you need. Once your holes are cut, it's time to add your lettuce. Take the plant out of the cell pack it came in and remove any excess soil from around the roots. I use my fingers to create a bit of space and then gently ease the roots of the plant underneath the fabric. Once the root ball is in, I use 2 fingers around the base of the plant to push the plant inside more firmly. We leave the bottom row of the planter free for flowers. They fill the bottom out nicely and add some color. We use verbena and bacoba and have had success with those because these tend to spill out and trail onto the ground as they grow. At the top of the pallet, we've planted cilantro, basil, and parsley. Once everything is planted, give it a good watering. The lettuce tends to look a bit sad at first, but they'll perk up after a few days. You may have to replace a couple here and there, but that's totally normal. Once you see a good amount of leaves coming from your plant, you can harvest them by cutting them with a sharp knife or scissors at the base of the plant. Be sure to leave a few of the inside leaves so that the lettuce can still capture sunlight and continue to grow new leaves. If you have made your own pallet garden, please share any tips and tricks that you've learned along the way.